One way that I left a mark is that Jeff is now running half marathons. That's awesome. Hope that many more of you are running. One of my favorite things, although I haven't been doing a whole lot of it. Just a couple of things. I'm so glad to be here and just get all my technology. So a number of things have happened since we left August 2014. As I mentioned, Jeff is now a runner. That's awesome. Anybody else picked up running in this last year? Running with Jeff. It's an awfully lonely path. You're running 13 miles by yourself, although never really running by yourself. I remember running the 10-miler, and some of you were there to help hand out the medals afterward. One of the worst experiences of my entire life. We left here, and I asked Laura, so should I wear my long pants underneath, my nice manly spandex pants? And probably not. So I had them on, and then I took them off, and I'm just wearing my shorts. And those of you who were there, you might remember it was sleeting and snowing as we were driving up there. This was, I guess, 2 years ago. And it was absolutely miserable. And I remember we're going down this long stretch, and then you turn and go uphill, and the wind's just blowing, and there's no one in sight. No one in sight. There's no one along the side of the road cheering. I don't see anyone ahead or behind. There's no option. I can't stop. What am I going to do? I'm just going to stop and freeze, And I remember, running up this hill, and the snow, and it just hit my leg. I was so miserable. And that was just a great illustration of how important it is to be on mission together. This was the mission 10-miler, by all means, and here I was alone. That wasn't a great feeling. But a couple of things have happened in this last year that I've learned, some lessons that I'm learning, and I want to kind of tie this into introducing this message. So we left, and by the grace and generosity of this church, we were supported so that I wouldn't totally sink into the water the first 4 months. So we kind of made it, and I worked some very interesting jobs. So I was the junk pastor for a couple months. I worked for 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Don't recommend that, but that was an interesting experience. A whole number of things I learned there. But then I got a good job working at UPS, and so it was a seasonal job, so I worked from the end of October. I remember driving Halloween last year, all the way up to about the second week of January, and I was just really praying and hoping that they would offer me a full-time job, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do after that, and whether or not we were going to start support raising or what. And so what ended up happening is we needed to make a decision about support raising before they were going to offer me the job or not. And so I didn't know. So I had to take a big leap of faith, and we believed God was calling us to move forward with Restoration Church. And a week later, my supervisor called me to offer me a job. But it was already too late. So I was so glad. God is so sovereign in our lives. You might think right now, as Eddie shared so well, about how it seems like chaos sometimes, right? Like the end of the semester, and there's all these things going on with school and the pressures, and things may seem, even right now, just chaotic in your family or with your friends or something. And as a matter, I'll tell another little story later. But anyway, God was controlling all of that, so we ended up starting support raising, and then I've done some other interesting things to make a few dollars. So more recently, since the summer, I've been driving Uber, and I didn't realize how strategic that would be in church planting. Because here I am picking up people from the neighborhood that we're targeting planting this church, almost on a daily basis, listening to their lives, all kinds of interesting people. Did you know that Germantown, Maryland, it's not technically a city, but if it was, it would be the second most ethnically diverse city in America. In America, only second to Jersey City. So this is a wildly diverse area. The vision of Restoration Church is to be an intentionally multi-ethnic, mission-shaped or shaped by the mission of Jesus community that worships God and life-giving services, and we love one another in authentic community, and we live on mission together by blessing our neighborhoods. And I know that I don't have to tell you this because you already know this, but as we've kind of researched in this last year, the one theme that is clear is that everyone everywhere is searching for authentic community. Everywhere, right? Do you resonate with that? Like, I know you want authentic community. I'm learning what that means. Our community is learning what that means. But that's our number one core value, authentic community. We say healthy relationships drive everything. So healthy relationship up in relationship to God, that really drives everything, right? That's the beginning of it. And then healthy relationships within the community, within the church, right? And if you don't have that, your influence out is hurt, right? And I mean, I've experienced that. I know that you have as well. And so I know that that's kind of some rhythm that you are wrestling with as well. So it's been a lot harder than we ever could have imagined. And so now Uber is so saturated in this area, it's hard to make any more money. Because I noticed on Craigslist that there's about 25 ads per day for Uber drivers. So there's too many now. I had to figure something else out. So this guy that I met 3 years ago that is the dad of one of the guys on our football team, it's another long story, but anyway, he offered me a job installing doors and windows, and I can work as much or as little as I want on a week-to-week basis. He has the exclusive rights to Lowe's for installing their doors and windows. So if anybody gets doors and windows and buys them at Lowe's in the next few months, I might show up at your house to take your old windows and doors out. By the grace of God, it's a really neat opportunity. A Jewish guy who God's just, I think, opening up some doors for me to be next to, and I'll probably work 3 days a week from there. All that to say, when you make a commitment to follow Jesus, like Jesus is calling us to go all in, and what we're learning is that there's not really a straight path from here to there. It's usually kind of like the 40 years of wandering, of the Israelites. And as you look through the stories of the Old Testament, it's usually this woven story. It's not really a straight path. I mean, how did Joseph end up being second in command to Pharaoh? It wasn't a straight path, like he worked up the chain, He got one job to another to another. I mean, he had to go all really down and then back up, and we feel like we've kind of been in that way. A couple more things real quick before we dive in. Super thankful for the support of some families here that have offered teens to help with our kids. And so I know Jeff's kids and June, Alice, or Emily, and some others. Been really thankful for that. And by no means am I inviting you to come join Restoration Church, but twice a month on Sunday evenings we have a gathering, and if you're interested in helping, that would be awesome. Talk to Laura about that. We can learn from you, and hopefully we can offer, be a blessing to you as well. And then finally, we are, but thank God, support raising as a missionary. I know you hear missionaries, right? And you have, I know for 5 years that I was here, we bring in missionaries, and I was on the other end of it. Jeff just come back from China, and recently was even talking to Sean and Weiwei about this as they are living the missionary dream, right? But it's a challenge. And if there's any way that we could talk to you, Laura and I, to share a little bit more of the story, just personally, as brothers and sisters and friends, and how you might be able to just be a blessing to us and really participate in what God is doing. We want to be partnered with you, like long term. I was just sharing, I don't know, with Steve or someone. We're not going anywhere. We haven't gone anywhere. We're still in Eric's house. My boys still live in his bedroom that he grew up in, and we'll be there as long as we possibly can. I know Auntie Rebecca threatened his parents to never raise the rent on us as long as we're there. So I think we're going to stay there as long as we can. We're so glad to be in the neighborhood. And one more thing along that line. People are searching for authentic community, but they're really hurting, right? And I know you guys had a great event last night. Jeff was telling me about it. So what we started to do is kind of do this. Halloween's just been the awesomest night as far as living as a missionary in our neighborhood. It's just been incredible. So we set up this table, and we had hot chocolate, and we were planning on doing a lot more. Actually, Vince was going to bring over like a light show, and then it didn't work out. Did you know Vince is getting married? Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. So if you're not invited, please crash the wedding. By all means. Don't tell me I said that. But anyway, we set this up, and we have neighbors coming over, engaging. One family invited themselves over for a play date next week, which was awesome that we had never met. They just moved to the neighborhood. I say all that to say this. This 13-year-old boy I'd never seen is hanging out at our house. I've never seen him before. I guess Elijah had seen him. Did you know Tyler before? Yeah, so he'd seen him before. Didn't know anything about him. The night's wrapping up. He's hanging out. It's kind of the last one there, and we're packing everything up. And then he asked me if he can stay at our house last night. And I said, well, not sure about that. Who are you? Where are your parents? And I won't get into it because it's kind of personal, but I didn't let him stay in our house because I said, well, you need to go home. Like, I'll take you home, I'll drive you home, I'll talk to your parents, I'll call them, whatever. But no, like, your parents might be crazy, and, by letting you in my house, I don't know them, I don't know you. And so he said, well, can I stay in your front yard?
What?
For real. And it wasn't really warm last night, And I said, well, I think it's pretty safe, but you really need to go home. You really need to go home. And here's the reason I say that, because people around us, this 13-year-old boy didn't want to go home, he got in trouble, and he didn't want to face his parents. And maybe some of you young people have felt like that, but you were more afraid of what would happen if you didn't go home, right? But you may have felt that way. All that to say this, my life, I often feel like my life is jacked up. And I'm going to use that term, I know it's kind of risky, I hope that doesn't offend anyone, but I'm going to use it this morning, because I think it may resonate with some of you. I just feel that in my own life, and I feel it in three ways, I think like Tyler probably did, right? Number one, from sin. Like our lives are jacked up, first of all, because we're influenced by sin. And I have yet to meet someone that's like, oh no man, I don't struggle with sin. I met a guy doing a wedding last weekend, and I was talking to him before the wedding. He was a groomsman. And he was there for the rehearsal, and then we're right before the wedding, and he said, we're just talking, and he says, so are you like a real pastor? Which people ask me that when I do weddings all the time. And I'm like, well, yeah, actually, we left our church a year ago. We're starting a new church, Restoration Church. He's like, oh man, that's great. Like, you don't come across like real preachy. And he's like, I really love that, man. It's really cool. We can talk. He's like, so then there's kind of a silent moment, and then he's like, yeah, I hate church. He just said that, He's like, man, I just hate church. And I said, yeah, well, that's interesting, And I said, yeah, we're just trying to make it about Jesus, really. And I said, look, here's the bottom line. Here's the message. I said, I appreciate that. Like, I don't want to come across preaching. What he meant was he grew up in a church where it was he felt like the finger was being pointed down at him in a judgmental way. And Jesus was the anti of that, wasn't it? And I said to him, well, I think the message of Jesus is, first of all, the solution, the problem of sin is dealt with real simply. Like, Jesus can solve the sin problem real simply. There's not a deep, real, preachy message that you need to hear. And then once you deal with the sin in your life, the message of Jesus is very uplifting. And that's what I want my message to be. And he's like, oh yeah, he said, yeah, I get the whole sin thing. I get the whole sin thing. People get it. People understand that. And that's where my feeling of jacked upness feels, and I feel like most people do, right? Or death. So now that I know that I look much younger, but next month is a big birthday for me. So as I get to this milestone in my life, things are starting to break down a little bit. I was talking to Jeff about running a half marathon. It's like, I can't just go out there and run a half marathon. Like, I need like months to prepare for that. And then once I do it, like, I'm going to have to recover. Because Jeff's amazing that he's walking without much of a limp right now, because I know I probably would be. And then evil. And death is not only the death that we feel in our bodies, but people die, right? Loved ones die. We see death around us. And then finally, evil. And we hear and see evil things. And last night there's probably a great illustration, or just the whole idea of Halloween. I drove by this one house, and it's like this big inflatable devil. And I'm like, I don't know that they mean much by it, but I'm like, well, happy Halloween, Who wants a devil in their yard? That's gonna just look evil, It's like, and this somehow has a connection with kids and candy. I don't understand all that, but there's a lot of real evil. So not only does my life feel jacked up, but the world is jacked up because of sin, death, and evil. And I know this is kind of a long introduction to this, but here's just, this is just a snapshot of the world that you're growing up in. So between 1966 and 2012, there were 90 mass shootings in the U.S. out of 292 globally. I'm not talking about war, okay? We're just talking about mass public shootings. 90 of the 292 globally were here in the U.S. The U.S. has only 5% of the world's population, but saw 31% of public mass shootings. 1 month ago, 9 people were shot in Roseburg, Oregon. Maybe some of you remember that. A gunman opened fire on 2 Virginia journalists and the woman they were interviewing on TV. The shooter was influenced by long history Really, he was inspired by a long history of public mass shootings throughout the country. He said he admired mass shooters like those in Columbine High School, that's in Colorado. That happened about 15, no, that was in 1997, I think. 99? 1999. Yeah, 1999, right. So he was inspired by that shooting, the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007, and he put down a deposit for a gun 2 days after the Charleston, South Carolina church shooting this June. That's jacked up. That's jacked up. Just last night I was sharing the story about hanging out in front of our house, trick-or-treaters giving out candy. I told you the story about this boy who was afraid to go home. That's jacked up. But in the midst of this jacked up world, we have a God. Now this is where most people can't make the connection, but we have a God who is good. Now what does it mean that he's good? It doesn't mean that you go knocking on God's door and he's handing out candy. We often treat God like he's a trick-or-treat kind of God. You know, like we just pray to God and then he gives us treats. That isn't what good means, right? So the idea of the goodness of God comes from Exodus when Moses says, show me your glory. For I know 5 years that I was here, we talked a lot about this. And the very first thing that God says is, I'm going to make my goodness pass in front of you. It's his holiness. It's his total separateness. He's so distinct from us, and yet he's immanent or present in our lives. Aren't you glad that God is different than you? Like, I'm so glad that even though I'm so jacked up and our world is so jacked up, God is not. God is so perfectly set apart and yet willing to be present with me. So he's good, and check this out. He has sent us some jacked up people on a mission in this jacked up world. He sent us on a mission. And here's the problem. If I just hurry along with my life, and you probably noticed that in Montgomery County it's kind of fast, and there's a lot of pressure, right? And so it's easy for us to just hurry along through our day-to-day, week-to-week life. And I tend to get caught up in just the rat race. And if we're not careful, we settle for this ho-hum version of Americanized Christianity. Right? And when I say that, what I mean is the American dream is like you get a good education and you get a good job and you make good money and then you have the house with the white picket fence and your house is happy because you have everything that you want and dreamed of, and you just work hard enough and you can get that. That's kind of the American dream, and we live often the American church dream. And if we're not careful, that's what we get into. Maybe some of you can relate. However, let's see if this works. Yes. However, if we can learn to center our lives in God, we can navigate well. We don't have to settle for this ho-hum version of Christianity, and we will fulfill God's disciple-making mission. So your purpose, right? Your purpose in life, and you have to connect your personality and experiences and your spiritual gifts and all this to exactly how this fits in. But the overarching purpose of our existence and presence here on earth is to be a disciple-making mission. That is the mission of the church, right? To be a disciple-making place. So how then do we center our lives in God? There's no silver bullet. Maybe we've tried this before. I know I have. There's no 3 quick and easy steps. But there are some rhythms. I'm going to use the word rhythm this morning, that if we build into our daily lives, they can help us be centered in God. So what is a rhythm? Here's a definition. A rhythm is a movement, fluctuation, or variation. Some of you, you're connected with this. Sounds like science here. This is good. Movement, fluctuation, or variation marked by the regular recurrence or natural flow. Regular recurrence or natural flow. Like there's a certain rhythm to things. Yeah, this can be used in all, obviously we think of rhythm in music, right? So it's like the beat, it's like the rhythm. Do you got rhythm or do you not have rhythm? There's rhythm and blues kind of music, one of my favorite, or better known as what? R&B, right? It's just got rhythm, man. You can kind of tap your foot, kind of bob your head. Like it's regular recurrence of this kind of beat. It's like the bass line is kind of rhythm, right? As a Christian, and the way that we're applying it here is like the regular rhythms of a certain type of life. So Laura's from rural Pennsylvania, and there's a certain rhythm to country life. There's a certain rhythm to Montgomery County life. There's a certain rhythm to going to Poolsville High School or being in the IB program or being in a magnet program or something, right? There's a flow to that goes with that lifestyle. As a Christian, we're talking about the rhythms of a disciple, or the marks of a disciple, a person who follows Jesus. What is a person who follows Jesus marked by? There are some distinct rhythms that a follower of Jesus experiences. Life centered in God is summed up in the Great Commandment, right? We love God up with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind. We love our neighbor as ourselves in, and we love the world. We love our neighbor as ourselves. So the neighbor is both in and out, right? We love the community, followers of Jesus, and we love those who are outside on mission. There are several rhythms or movements marked by regular occurrence or natural flow that will help us live lives centered in God. So this morning, all that to get into Psalm 32. So if you have your Bible, turn to Psalm 32. I'm going to have it up on the screen as well. We're looking at a rhythm that can keep us focused up in worship to God. So at Restoration Church, our number one core value is authentic relationships, and I shared before, that begins with our relationship up with God. A healthy relationship with God then drives everything else. So here's the rhythm. And I apologize, I am so backwards in the rhythm of CCCG that I didn't think like a week before, I should send Jeff some information to get the bulletin or something. It just didn't occur. So thankfully you got something in there. I think the text is in there as well. So the rhythm is this: pause. Pause from the busyness of our lives to restore. Psalm 32. This is one of 10 or so wisdom psalms. Wisdom psalms. These are reflections on life and life's problems. Some of you are good at that, right? Reflecting on life. It's kind of philosophical, right? Our lives, the lives of others, and our world has problems, right? So these are reflections on the problems of, in this case, David. And you're going to see how similar, it strikes me anyway, how similar the problems of life that David observed and the problems of life that we observe today are the same. As big as our problems feel, God has bigger and more powerful answers. That's not just cliche, right? So let's dive in. These words were written by both a gigantic saint, right? David was a friend of God, but he was also a great sinner. David was a friend of God, but on top of his class when it comes to sin. Like he had 4.0 when it comes to sin. History of sin, boom, I got that, man. My name's David. Yep, adultery, check that off. Murder, shoot, got that. Running from God for a year, yep, pretty good at that. Dysfunctional family, yep, come from that. Jacked up life, yep, experienced a jacked up world. He knew what it was all about. So here's what he wrote, starting in verse 1. Psalm 32. David said this. This is the blessing of forgiveness. Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. And the opposite of that is true, right? How hard it is for the person whose sin is not forgiven. How hard it is for us when we walk with the weight of sin. Verse 2, blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. The person who is not worried about their sin not being forgiven, because that's just a heavy weight. There's a great blessing in forgiveness. Verse 3. The brokenness of sin in isolation. When I kept silent, David said, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Selah. This is the first of 3 pauses. We're going to come back to what this means. Selah. And then in verse 5. Then I'm guilty. Then he says, then I acknowledged my sin to you, Lord, and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgive the guilt of my sin. See, you forgive the guilt of my sin. Verse 6. Therefore, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You, Lord, maybe you've heard this in a song. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. Selah. I'm safe in the presence and will of God amidst the chaos of life. Selah. And then this last part of the psalm. Verse 8, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Do not be like the horse or mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. Many are the woes of the wicked, the one in whose sin is not forgiven. Woe to that person. Why? Because that person is cut off from the blessing of God, which is available only to the one whose sin is forgiven. Not to the person who does righteous deeds. The person is not cut off because they have done evil things. The person is cut off because they have not been forgiven. In contrast, the blessing is open and available and ready to be poured out on the one who is simply forgiven. And let's celebrate. Verse 11, rejoice in the Lord, be glad you righteous, not because of the righteous deeds you've done, but because you're righteous through forgiveness. And we know now, post-Jesus, that it's through Him. Sing, all you who are upright in heart. So I want to look at these three Selah pointers in this text. Selah points us to a vital discipleship rhythm, the pause. And I would be the first to stand up to you and confess that in this last year, this is something that I really have needed to learn. And I am learning. The Selah is a moment of pause. It could be to give praise or thanks. It could be to lament. And this is something we don't do well enough. Someone who has become kind of a hero of mine, Soon Chan Ra. He planted the big Korean church in Germantown. I think it's New Covenant, or is that right, New Covenant? So he was part of that team in the 90s when church planting didn't exist and multi-ethnic church planting didn't exist. He was really a forerunner in that. I got to meet him and have lunch with him a few months ago and pick his brain about this. He just recently wrote a book on Lamentations. Sounds fun, huh? A book on lamentation and lament. And he studied a lot of other cultures and how significant and important the idea of lament is and how poorly Westerners do it. I remember being in China in 2005, and we were way off in this village. I mean, and I normally say when I'm describing where it was, that it's like, go to the middle of nowhere and keep going, and eventually you'll get to this place. And we were at this school that was brand new. It had just been built. They never had, Westerners really that looked like me anyway there. And so I remember we were there, and real early one morning, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, we hear this all this noise, like the people are banging on pots and pans or something. And I'm thinking, there is a parade in the street. They're coming after us, and they're gonna kill us. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like this death march, and it kept getting closer and closer. And there's no security. I'm just freaking out, totally freaked out. And thankfully, at some point, it just went by, and they didn't come. And I found out that someone had died. Someone had died, and this was like the lament parade or something. Right? I'm totally ignorant in explaining how. I don't know exactly, but that's the way I understood it. That it was like someone passed away, and this was how they were lamented. So in Chinese culture, and I don't know if that's tied to Buddhism or not, but a deep sense of lament that as an American, I've never experienced that here. Have you ever seen that here? Have you ever seen that? Have you heard of a wailing parade after someone dies in America? No, never heard of that. Consider this. These are probably familiar. Psalm 46, 10 and 11. The psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. The God of Jacob is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Pause. Sit on that for a minute. I am God. Pause. And then Matthew 20,